those of you that know me, I should start there, and then I'm going to go to you, Sarah, because this is who you really came to see tonight. So my name's Shanika Whitehurst. I served as, starting as a board member and then vice president somehow in the last year, last year or so. But definitely getting myself last year more familiarized with ACT and the things that we do, and pushing from a legislative perspective, but also just when we're looking at issues that affect our overall communities. Those are things that I feel like are beneficial, not just for one, but for all. Really, when it comes down to it, whether someone takes transit or not, it's still going to benefit them. And part of, I look at it as my duty now, serving as president, is also looking at how do we continue that, but then how do we continue to evolve and grow as an organization as well. I would say part of the pieces that brought me here is being more civically minded and involved with the city Gaithersburg, and either whether it's fighting the council on one thing or another, probably more so that, but definitely not just for myself, but it was more so for our community at large, and breaking down dichotomies where I may see them when it comes to local governments and such, because they're really the ones that affect us the most, right, next to state. So all of those pieces, all of those issues, like I said, I try to hold them near and true, and when we're looking for an angle or a way to pierce the armor, if you will, to get an issue hand, I'm always open for suggestions. If people have questions, I'm open for those questions over email or whatever have you, and from a conversation perspective. So I say in real life, I work for Consumer Reports. I do their their product sustainability work. So if you want to know how green something is that you may want to buy, that's my baby on their site. But the environment, transit, housing, people, I mean, this is what we do. This is what we're here for. So now I would like to introduce our speaker this evening. Sarah Kline is here to discuss, as I brought up a little bit ago, is essentially how are we going to move forward with transportation when we now have a different shape up of Congress, right? With both the House and the Senate being on the Republican side, also obviously the White House, which changes approaches, or should change approaches if you're savvy enough. But like I said, hopefully Sarah will give us some tips and pieces like that to get us through. And Sarah, I'll leave it to you to finish your prestigious biography. Everybody, Sarah Kline.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was awesome. Actually, maybe I should. Now I wish I had joined ACT before this so that I could have voted for you, because that was great. So, as you may be able to tell, I had a terrible cold last week, which I'm better from, except that I can't project that well. So, can the folks in the back hear me? Yes? Excellent. I don't know. Does the mic actually project, or is it just for the...
No, it's just for the people at home.
Yeah, so the people at home probably can hear me. And those of you who brave the cold to come do this in person, unfortunately have to hear me kind of really trying, and I'll do my best. Thank you again. That was fantastic. And just, I got myself a little depressed preparing to talk about the next few years, and just listening to you now, I feel inspired again. So I'm really glad to be here tonight. Thank you for the invitation. Again, Sarah Kline. I'm an independent consultant on federal transportation policy. I'm actually based in Fairfax, Virginia. Yeah, I know. I've been there for almost 20 years now, actually. And there's a lot of similarities with Montgomery County, honestly. I grew up in Bethesda. My whole family is still in Montgomery County, except for me, the rebel who went, across the river. And so it does feel like home. Also, my first experience in transit, besides riding the ride-on when I was in high school, was actually working for Senator Sarbanes from Maryland, fantastic legislator and leader and man. And so that's, Maryland still feels like home to me. I also, as was mentioned, I'm on the board of directors for Metro. But tonight I'm speaking in my sort of personal professional capacity and taking off the Metro hat. So what I say is not on behalf of the Metro Board of Directors in any sense. So caveat given. So I've been asked to talk about what transportation policy is going to look like under a Trump administration. The short answer is, I have no idea. They are likely to be very unpredictable. As you may have noticed, it is hard to get a clear idea from soon-to-be President Trump of what he's going to do on any particular daily basis, and it might change the next day. So it is very difficult to say what the next few years are going to look like. You all know that. And if that was all I was going to say, I don't think I would have been invited to speak. So instead, I will go on and give some speculation of my own about what transportation policy might look like. With that, given that who knows kind of feeling that we all have. So we can make some educated guesses on transportation policy in a Trump administration, and some of these things might be explored tomorrow when his nominee for transportation secretary has a hearing before the Senate Commerce Committee. And so if you're interested in this topic, you might want to watch that hearing too and see, what kinds of things come up and what Mr. Duffy, who's the nominee, says on these topics. He has not a lot of record on transportation, so it's sort of an open question on what he's going to do. So how would I go about figuring out what kind of transportation policy agenda there might be? Well, I looked at some of the writings that are out there, and specifically Project 2025, which I'm sure everybody heard about during the election. It was the agenda that was written by a lot of former officials from the previous Trump administration, outlining what they thought would be a good policy agenda for a conservative, kind of more right-wing or administration. And so Mr. Trump had tried to say, that's not what I'm going to do, it's not my thing, whatever, but it's the sort of the best that's out there in terms of policy ideas on transportation from the people that have worked with Mr. Trump. So it's sort of funny, when I looked at Project 2025, and my remarks are only about transportation. I didn't even read the rest of it. I'm so terrible. Single issue voter, and it's transportation. It could have been Project 2005. It really was very similar to a lot of the more conservative right-wing Republican policy proposals that we've seen for the last 20 years. So I'll go through a couple of them. And by the way, when I talk about transportation, I'm only talking surface transportation, roads, rail, buses, walking and biking. I don't do airplanes, and I don't do ships. I mean, I do like them, but I'm not an expert on those policies. So what are the major pillars for transportation in Project 2025? There are 4. This is not exactly how it's organized, but it's how I think about it. The first one is that the federal role in transportation should be primarily about roads. And all that other stuff I just mentioned, transit, biking, walking, that's all for local people to figure out. Cities, counties, they can figure that stuff out. Federal government's focus should be on roads. So that's number 1. Secondly, is that the federal government's role is basically just to be a pass-through funder. So the federal government can collect gas taxes, spread them back out among the states, and that should be it. The federal government really shouldn't be the one deciding anything about projects. That's for state governments to do, state departments of transportation. The third thing that's underlying a lot of what's in Project 2025, not just in transportation, as everyone has heard, is that the federal government should not be doing regulation. We should roll back, in fact, many of the regulations we already have to allow the maximum flexibility and freedom to everybody in America to do whatever they want. That's a paraphrase. Yeah, so it's not 100% true, but in general, that's sort of the direction they want to go. And lastly, number 4, the last theme in Project 2025 is that the federal government should do whatever it can to bring more private investment into transportation, right? So those are not new ideas. These are things that we've been seeing in transportation policy for as long as I've been in it, which is more than 20 years now. So again, it feels kind of familiar. One new thing this time around, though, is that there, I think, is going to be more influence from the folks like Elon Musk and other tech people to really push some of the new technology, automated vehicles. Where that's going to go, I don't know, but I see that coming, and so we'll have to figure that one out too. So just as a thought exercise, what would it mean if all 4 of those principles were actually adopted into law on day 1? Well, the main thing is federal funding for transit would disappear. That's bad, right? That would make a huge dent in the budgets for Metro, for Ride-On, for a variety of services all across the country. And not just for the services, they would impact everybody, of course, who uses those services today and everybody who might have done so tomorrow if that funding were to disappear. So that to me is like the biggest thing that's out there that is the most disturbing, honestly. The second thing we might see is that projects that can attract private investment might start to go forward faster and sooner and easier than projects that can't. Now, I actually think there's a role for public-private partnerships. I'm sure there's a variety of opinion on this in the room. There always is. There is a role for certain projects, and they tend to be the bigger, more complex ones, often toll roads and bridges. Sometimes transit, but the kinds of transit improvements that are smaller scale, maybe it's a rapid bus network or increased frequency with traffic light changes or what it might be, those aren't the kind of projects that are going to bring in private investment typically. So you're going to see a disparity in the types of projects that the federal government is interested in seeing.
What projects do you think would bring in money?
Do you want? I've been told we should hold questions till the end, but I definitely want to have time for questions. So please hold that question because I'd love to discuss it further or afterwards. The other thing that might happen if we were in this Project 2025 world is that fewer regulations are going to allow projects to zoom through faster. If we were in that situation, that is what would happen. So sometimes that's not the end of the world because some projects actually are good and valuable and beneficial, and it would be nice if those could move through faster. On the other hand, there are plenty of projects that aren't good and beneficial and valuable and actually could cause harm to the economy, to the environment, and not benefit people and waste a lot of money. And those would also fly through. And if you really start to have no regulations, one of the regulations that helps keep these kinds of projects that could have bad effects from happening is public involvement and public participation in the process. And the more they try to push projects through faster, the more you have to watch out and make sure that public involvement process doesn't disappear along the way. So that's kind of not a great future, right? Like no funding for transit from the federal government, a lot of wild stuff happening with different types of projects and kind of a different mix. That, to me, that doesn't look great. So the question is, how likely are we to have Project 2025 just implemented and sort of pushed forward? The answer, in my opinion, is not very likely, right? It's important to remember that a lot of this can't just be done by the president on day one, as much as he might like to. There's a lot of laws in place, and Congress gets to have a say. And even though we have a Republican-led Congress now in both the House and the Senate, Republicans are not monolithically, ideologically opposed to transit. Each member of Congress, each senator, has an individual approach to these issues that they will take. Many of them might be aligned with Project 2025, but many of them won't be. Maybe they have a family member who has experienced a need to use transit. Maybe they've ridden transit themselves. Maybe they actually like riding a bicycle safely, things like that. So we can't really go in and assume that every Republican is just going to, fall into place and vote for some of these really more radical policies. So what do I think is going to actually happen? I think we're going to have a lot of smaller fights. I don't think that the first thing out of the box is going to be let's defund transit, because that was actually tried, maybe somewhat long ago. In 2012, the House that was led by the Republicans at that time actually did have a proposal that would take transit funding away from the Highway Trust Fund and really shrink it a lot. And that proposal failed because transit advocates all around the country went to their members of Congress and said, hey, we depend on this funding. We get millions of dollars or whatever it might have been from the federal government. And I really hope you're not going to vote to take millions of dollars away from your constituents. And in fact, people did not want to take that vote. So transit survived big picture in 2012. And I really doubt that it'll get to that point again this time. But what I do think is going to happen is smaller, more targeted attacks on transit. So programs that are out there like the low and no emission bus program, for example, that got a big increase in the bipartisan infrastructure law, that I think is going to be, up for potential cuts. The Capital Investment Grant Program, which funds new transit rail lines and bus rapid transit, that's always a favorite target for cuts. So we're going to see, I think, more of sort of strategic attacks, shrinking programs, cutting eligibility, trying to rein transit in a little bit, which makes it a lot harder for all of us to fight against it, because it's like whack-a-mole now. You're trying to do a lot of different things instead of just one big thing. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is regulations, which I talked about before, the desire to roll back regulations. I think one of the, I talked about the environmental regulations. That's obviously going to be a target of people who are going to want to roll that back. I think for groups like this one, looking at what the public participation requirements, what happens to them, is going to be really important. I don't think there's going to actually be an attempt to repeal the law, the National Environmental Policy Act. That would just be taking on too much. That's too big. But the NEPA law is actually really short. It doesn't have a ton of detail in it, and all the stuff that people complain about with NEPA is in the regulations. So you can start pulling back those regulations and no, I'm not touching the environmental law. I'm just tweaking it around the edges. I think that could have a major impact on what projects get through. Let's see. Okay, so there's going to be lots of little battles, right? But that doesn't mean that every single day Congress is going to be doing something that affects transportation. So I wanted to highlight just a couple of moments that I see in the next 2 years that we should really be paying attention to. One of them is coming up as soon as March, which is finishing, hopefully, funding the government for the fiscal year we're currently in, which is only half funded because we're only funded through March. So Congress will have to come back and provide, I assume, funding for the government, federal government, for the rest of fiscal 2025, which ends in September. That's going to be their first chance out of the box to start trying to do cuts and this and that. So I don't know if there's going to be a big battle over funding for those 6 months of the remaining in the year, or if they'll maybe just hold their fire and let it go and focus somewhere else. Because the other thing that I see coming up this year, as I'm sure folks are aware, one of the main priorities for the new administration is to extend the tax cuts that they got passed in 2017, which expire next year, or this year, next year, whatever year we're in. Anyway, soon. They expire, and the administration wants them extended. Also, they have to deal with the debt limit. So we have reached our debt limit, which is currently suspended, but we're going to run out of ability to, well, it's actually not currently suspended. The suspension ended at the beginning of January. So we're going to run out of money to pay our bills at the federal level in a few months. And the administration really needs to do something about that. So they've got the big picture tax cuts, what are we doing about debt, and the overarching desire in the Republican caucus to kind of roll back domestic spending as much as they can. So all these big picture fiscal priorities might end up getting wrapped up into some big package this year. That's what I would expect would happen. Some big deal is going to be negotiated, which could actually impact transportation funding, even though transportation is not likely to be discussed specifically in this context. This is big picture, like government-wide stuff. But we all still need to be paying attention to it, because whatever deal is reached about domestic spending for the next maybe 10 years is going to affect transportation. So let me see. Oh, and one other thing before I move on to what are we going to do about this now that I've brought everybody down and depressed. After we get through this big thing that I just talked about, Congress will start to talk about the transportation reauthorization, because the bipartisan infrastructure law ends in 2026 in September. Now, I don't think this Congress is actually going to finish a new transportation reauthorization, and that's nothing against this Congress. It's just that I have never seen a Congress do a transportation reauthorization bill on time. So it just doesn't happen. Now it'll happen just to spite me. But anyway, but that being said, there will be some discussion of what should be in this transportation reauthorization bill, and we need to be part of that discussion. So what can we do about this? There's definitely still things to be done. As I said at the outset, can't assume that every Republican is going to vote one way and every Democrat is going to vote the other way. It doesn't always work that way, particularly on transportation, where oftentimes you get rural Republicans and Democrats voting one way, and then urban Democrats and some suburban Republicans voting another way. Like, it doesn't always just sort of work on party lines. So the most important thing to do at the federal level is to keep those relationships strong with the members of your delegation. And you guys have a fantastic delegation. I mean, historically, they've been just really terrific on these issues. They're going to have a lot to deal with. So they need to know that you all are interested, you're paying attention, you're there to help, and that you're working with other groups in the region and even nationally to try to support them. You're asking them to keep fighting for transit. They need to know that you're behind them and that you're covering, some cover for them so they can do what they need to do, because they're going to have a lot of stuff flying at them. So just keeping those relationships strong is a really helpful and important thing to do. The other thing is, and this is a reflection that the transit community nationwide has been wrestling with, and a lot of people have been wrestling with this question in general, but how can we make a better case for transit that resonates better with Republican members of Congress? I think that there's a couple of things that we can do. One is, some Republican members of Congress think that transit is the New York subway. That's it. Maybe they know there's a metro in DC. Probably they know that. But like, when they think transit, they think like 100 years old, underground. There's been plenty of stories about crime in the New York system. That's the image that some members of Congress have of transit. And yet in this region, we have really a fantastic system, great bus system in Montgomery County. I am a little biased, but I also think our Metro Bus and Metro Rail are fantastic, and there's some great systems in Virginia as well. So like, how can we show that to the members of Congress who don't really know what transit is? Because some of them don't come from cities that have an extensive bus system. Some of them don't believe it can work in a suburban county. And we know that it can. So like, thinking of ways, maybe they come to ride on a bus with somebody, maybe, some member of the Montgomery County delegation invites somebody from a different delegation to come join them for a ride. Showing the success of transit is going to be extremely important, because another thing that's happened over the last few years, and this is not anybody's fault, this is just how things evolved, right, is we had a lot, so obviously pandemic happened, ridership depressed. We've had a lot of articles in the paper about transit ridership is down, nobody's riding transit, everybody's working from home. Even now, when ridership is coming back in many places. We're still seeing this kind of rhetoric. And neither Democrats nor Republicans are going to want to do a bailout. They don't want to be rescuing a dying industry. They want to be investing in a successful industry. That's the terminology and the frame that we need. So we need to show that success. We need to keep doing things to deliver that success. And I think that's going to help a lot of people get around the idea of like, yes, we should invest in this. So I know that y'all are working a lot on that, and I actually want to just end by pointing out that even though I've talked entirely about federal policy, because that's what I do, state and local policy is still incredibly important, and in fact, potentially even more so, because it's possible the federal government kind of just gets a little stuck with all the stuff that they're going to be doing. But progress can still be made at the state and local level, which really do a lot in terms of funding, and even more than the federal government does in terms of funding, in terms of policy setting, in terms of selecting projects. I mean, the Department of Transportation today, State Department of Transportation today, has a lot of flexibility in what they use their federal funds for. I know that there's a significant budget challenge that's going to need to be worked out. But land use, which I know the county is looking at how to bring more density, more housing density, and more affordability into transit-rich areas. That work is so important in setting up the success that we need to have success at the federal level. So I guess basically what I'm saying is keep doing what you're doing and do even more of it. So that's my overview, and I'd be happy to discuss. And I'd like to start with your question, which.
I have two questions now. You said there were projects that will get attention. What are the projects?
So when I was talking about projects that might get attention from a federal Trump administration, they are those projects that are going to bring in a lot of private sector investment. So those tend to be, like I was saying, toll roads, because toll roads have a natural, easy payment stream. So a private company. Sorry?
Natural what?
A natural revenue stream that they bring back to it. So a private company invests, they're like, yeah, I'll build a toll road, and then I'll get the revenue from the tolls. Very easy to understand. I'm not going to opine on toll roads. I know that's a controversial issue. I think that there can be situations in which they can work. It's a long, complicated discussion about how to make it equitable and fair and affordable and reinvest into transit. But if you get all those things right, maybe it's okay. And again, that's controversial. The question is, though, for transit, where fares don't pay for the transit, right? They don't cover the cost of providing transit. How does a private company make money on that? Transit is not usually a money-making enterprise. There are ways to structure a contract. There are benefits to working with private contractors on a complicated project. But transit isn't. There's not a lot of examples of successful public-private partnerships right now today that are operating that make people think, oh yeah, this is a great opportunity for transit. So I think it'll shift things more toward road building and bridge building than transit. Oh, good. That's fantastic. I would be interested in, yeah, so one of the problems with talking about private investment in public infrastructure is that everybody has an initial reaction. The Republicans tend to be more like, yes, that's a great idea. And the Democrats tend to be like, oh no, we can't possibly have that. And in fact, there probably is a way to meet in the middle. It's hard. It is hard. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Very good.
Well, thank you for being here. Sorry I came a little late.
No worries.
I just want to realize. Excuse me. Let me put my microphone a little bit closer. All right. Let me say one more time. Okay. Yeah. So, as people would have mentioned, the bridge in Baltimore collapsed last March, and the Biden administration is able to help the state of Maryland to fund it. Key Bridge, the Key Bridge, when it started to collapse down by the ship, and wherever the Trump administration and is trying to take over, and how would it like impact on the funding for the Key Bay bridges to get repairs? Because this is what everybody has been talking about, especially throughout the road here in the state of Maryland.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And I wish I had an answer for you. And I wish I had thought to check on that before I came, because I can, again, speculate generally about what it might mean for projects generally. But I actually don't know 100% for the Bay Bridge because, or the Key Bridge rather, because one of the key things that matters is the status of the money. So is the money sort of, they've just said, like the DOT has said, yes, we're going to provide you money? Or has federal DOT signed a contract with the state of Maryland that says, yes, here, this is your money and we agree to provide it contractually? Or is it somewhere in between? So this is a lot of projects right now are going through this process of trying to make sure they have signatures on the bottom line that the money is coming. Because if you have a contract in place with the federal government that says you're going to get the money, you're more likely to get the money. If it's just like federal government was like, yeah, we'll provide that, but they haven't signed on the dotted line yet, it's more at risk. I don't know where the Key Bridge funding stands, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
But that is a question to ask if you have opportunity to ask. And actually now I'm curious and I will try to find out the answer for you. Yeah. Oh.
Hey. So I think the ray of sunshine that you mentioned was the opportunity to streamline some of the good projects. I'm wondering if there are particular things that would be particularly worthy of going after in terms of helping good transit projects to advance quickly and cheaply.
Yeah, so that's something that the question of permitting reform and environmental reform is something that sort of spans administrations. The Biden administration was open to that too. I think the Trump administration is going to go harder on that. But both sides recognize that there are things we should be doing faster. And so I think that, and as you alluded to, there are projects. I was speaking with someone, I don't remember where they're from, somewhere out west, where they talked about they wanted to do a sidewalk project and they couldn't get through the environmental review process. And the sidewalk was literally on the side of a road that existed. Like it seemed sort of intuitive that that would be a decent project to do. And yet, because it was on a state-owned highway, they had to go through a long process and they couldn't get an exemption and and it was too costly to pursue. Now, I don't know how true that was, but that's what they were saying. So the question is, can we come together and say, look, there are these sorts of safety-related projects that are below this dollar threshold that maybe we could agree can move through an expedited process, something like that. Like, that doesn't seem terrible to me, but I'm open to people telling me why that's bad. But just coming together and being able to talk about, okay, what are our actual goals here? Is it really to cut out public participation? Because in that case, I'm not coming to the table. Like if that's the end goal, like that's not going to go forward. But if the end goal is let's agree on what we want and then get it to happen faster, like maybe we can work on something there. I'm sort of in the initial stages of. I've actually been tasked by one of my clients to like figure out how to do this, which is of course an issue that's been bubbling up for the last like 40 years. So I'm not sure I can do it that fast, but it's definitely a promising area of bipartisan cooperation.
I probably share more of your pessimism than I do any of your optimism. This is an irrational moment.
Yeah.
That I don't think we've seen before. But that aside, with respect to transit funding, defending transit funding, if not advancing it, 40 years ago, there was a very prominent conservative whose name I've forgotten. He's probably dead. He created an organization that rallied other conservatives to support public transit. And I presume...
Yeah.
Paul Warwick.
Yep.
I presume the organization is defunct, but to the extent that prominent folks who want to at least defend transit, if not advance it, can rally conservatives who could formulate a policy perspective to present to the Republican Congress. I don't think presenting it to the president, I think that's meaningless, but to Congress, then maybe we could rally more Republican members of Congress to the idea. And very quickly, lastly, there are some people in this new administration who love underground transit. Of course, maybe not the New York subway, but Elon Musk would envision Hyperloop all across and around the country. And that's
true.
not transit, but nonetheless, he would suggest such. We have to oppose that.
Agreed. That would be a very interesting scenario if we get to that point. Let me just comment. Your point about what Paul Weyrich did is absolutely on point. 20 years ago, I had his book, which I can't remember the name of now, but I can picture the front. Like on my I was like quoting from that book in every speech that I wrote for Senator Sarbanes, because it is so valuable to be able to quote from somebody who's not seen as a total left wing. There are other, if we can find Republican voices to do that, I'm sure there are Republican mayors out there. There might be other organizations that are more bipartisan, thinking of like area agencies for aging, perhaps, like that have a nonpartisan kind of approach. Bringing these folks together to advocate for transit is definitely a great idea.
Question here,
Yes.
and then Paul in the back, and then this stuff. Thank you. So Jake, you're next.
Something that I've also noticed, over the years is that a good way to really frame these projects and make it so that, like it's an essential service and it needs to be funded right away, is you frame it in an accessibility lens. You frame it in, that, okay, this is essential service for individuals with disabilities who otherwise may not be able to drive. Like, for example, I have a rare vision impairment, and I've been doing a lot of, research on the intersectionality of like sustainability, urban development and accessible transit. And I'm really also even thinking about starting my own accessibility and sustainability consulting firm, about like, that will like perform audits of like various companies and, what have you, organizations that need to do better about their sustainability or accessibility if they want to. Of course, now with all the rollback of all this DEI, of all these DEI initiatives and diversity initiatives, they, this idea of like trying to find a compromise within an accessibility framework may be thrown out the door as by some conservatives saying that's too woke. But
Oh gosh, I hope we're not in that scenario.
I mean, I hope not either. I hope and pray we aren't, because that just shows that we've lost all humanity.
I think that. Sorry.
But I guess my question to you is then, and I'm sorry if this is so long-winded, but
I got excited when you talked about this.
can we better, how can we make the argument that this is an essential service, and it's, it really is a factor of accessibility, and the fact that there are people, thousands of people possibly, who will be stranded if we don't make these projects more accessible and more sustainable, and if we don't get these projects done. Because that's the thing that I feel like is getting in the way here. We need to start making that argument, but how can we make that argument?
That's a great question. 2 points. One, I think that the angle of accessibility for people who can't drive or whatever is actually very resonant with a lot of members of Congress who you might not think it is, because they know someone in that situation. We just don't know who those folks are necessarily, but you sometimes get, people can pick it up when they know someone personally who's dealing with it. And members of Congress have families and friends in their districts, and so they often do know someone from the accessibility angle who benefits from transit. And so finding those allies under the accessibility framework is a great strategy. The question about how to sort of, see, transit has gone back and forth over the last 20 years in how to frame itself. Is it like a social service that should be provided for everybody from government because it's part of what government should do? Or is it an economic driver that is market-based and should deliver for the economy and economic growth? Both of these things can be true, but we tend to only talk about one at a time. And in a Republican-led Congress, we tend to lean more heavily on the market demands transit more so than transit is demanded because it is a service that government should provide. And I don't know how to reconcile those two things. And I think we have to be nimble enough to be able to meet the person sitting across the desk from us where they are. So the first step in all of this relationship building with new members of Congress and old is, what are you interested in? Oh, let me tell you how transit delivers that. So that might be one way to keep it. Yeah, it's relationship building and education, and figuring out what is motivating the person you're trying to move. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Given, as you said, that we're going to be in an era of tight budgets, and given the fact that, as we see with the Purple Line here, and as we see with like the Second Avenue subway in New York, etc., there is a cost, an excessive cost problem with a lot of transit projects. Are there any? I know there are no magic solutions, but are there things that an organization like us can advocate that would be helpful in trying to promote accomplishing transit that is not so expensive to build?
So there's a lot wrapped up in that question, and you touched on something that Republicans like to point out, that it's really, really expensive to build transit. And there's data that looks at some projects like the big ticket items in New York. New York is expensive, like stuff is costly there. But there are plenty of lower cost transit alternatives, as I'm sure you all know, and because there's, you know, if we had a robust network of bus lanes, traffic signal priority, you know, a million ways to make buses run faster and quicker, and that saves money actually in operations, and it allows more people to get where they need to go. Like, there are lots of cost-effective ways of doing things better than we're doing now. I'm not sure if I'm getting to the root of your question or not on that, but there's sort of the big ticket items, and sometimes those are the most appropriate, and then there's the less costly items. And the real key is figuring out, which one does my community need? Like, sometimes, yes, a high capacity rapid transit line, maybe on rails, is the right solution depending on the density and the destinations and where they are and all that stuff. And sometimes it isn't. And it's hard to know sometimes which one is the right one to do. But there are both of those types of options available.
Yes, we have advocates in these two silos of highways and transit. As a transit advocate, can you break down getting away from the structural solution and go to, can you name the 4 top benefits of why you support transit, and would you be willing to entertain another solution that does better at those 4 top priorities or benefits, and maybe includes the 4 top benefits of highways to come up with a better solution? So can you start with the 4 main functional reasons why you're a transit supporter?
Okay, so I'm just so curious what the bottom line is, what the option is that meets the top 4 goals and is
well,
better.
That's why neural evolutionary algorithms are used. They figured that out.
Yeah, no, I think so. Transit has a number of benefits, right? It is more affordable than car ownership. It is more accessible for people who can't drive, don't choose to drive, they're too young to drive, they're too old to drive. Accessibility. Transit has environmental benefits that car ownership currently does not, and I don't see that happening real soon. Let's say that's top 3.
One more.
I'm sorry?
One more,
I know. Okay, I'll open it up for the question. Better land use. It promotes better land use. It saves money for governments.
What'd you say, better what?
It's support. That's right. And it does support economic development and density and a more vibrant and thriving communities.
as
So
condition.
there's your 4. I don't. You got another one?
I'll just add one.
Yeah, add one.
You could, sorry.
Add one.
You can accommodate more growth and population density with transit without having to build more roads.
That's right.
So
It is
congestion
actually
relief.
a money saver
Yeah.
when you look at the sort of total cost like that. Oh, sorry. I'm going to stop calling on people because
Yes, if back during Reagan, not everyone can remember that far, or some weren't even born yet. They passed a gas tax increase, and part of the deal was an earmark of part of the increase to transit.
Yes.
Is that still in effect? And if it is, doesn't that kind of force them to at least recognize that they need to fund something in transit? Which leads to the root question, which is, what is their justification for saying the federal government should do roads and let local do everything else, which is okay if they're handing a pile of money to local and saying do everything else and you figure it out. That's not so bad.
Right.
What is their justification for saying that only roads and not transit are bona fide federal interests?
Also a great question. Yes, the agreement that was reached in 1982 is still in effect. Transit does still get a portion of the federal gas tax. Yes, that to me suggests that, maybe we'll be able to keep that, and the goal had originally been to try to expand that even further. I have never really understood why transit would not be seen as part of the federal interest. One argument is that roads allow for interstate commerce, which is clearly in the federal government's realm, and transit as an intra-city thing doesn't. But that's not really true in our interconnected transportation system. If we didn't have transit in cities, we wouldn't have interstate commerce either. The whole thing would just shut down. Also, there is another clause in the Constitution about the general welfare of people. And even when you're not in a city, you still need to get where you need to go, and not everyone can drive. So I have my personal views. I don't want to speculate too far about what is driving people, but there's long been a skepticism about the value of cities. And transit is inherently kind of linked to the idea of cities. And the federal transit program came out of basically the Federal Housing Act, giving money to cities to start being able to move the people who were in public housing to places around the cities. So it's very much associated with like cities and who uses transit, and but I don't fully myself understand. You can check out Project 2025, actually. It's available to download. You might get emails from the Heritage Foundation afterwards for a few days, but they
You might get a stiff drink afterwards as well.
yeah, just read the transportation section.
So we have this gentleman and then Chris Farrell will be last.
I was just going to add another point to the 3, 4, or 5 most important passes. You have flexibility in transportation when you have bus lanes. You can rearrange the bus lanes very cheaply. If the needs for commuters change, like a company closes down, there's nothing in this area. Suddenly, you don't have to transport anybody there anymore.
That's right. If you just build a road out there, then there's the road, and there's no manufacturing plant at the end of it. Like, yeah, good point.
Thank you very much, Sarah. There are gubernatorial elections in 2 states in 25. Will transportation issues be something in either of them? New Jersey, interestingly enough, one of the candidates I think is going to make congested pricing, pretty substantial part of his differentiating in the Democratic primary. Your comments?
Yeah, I actually don't know enough about New Jersey to speculate. I do know New Jersey is not happy about what New York just did with congestion pricing, to put it mildly. But I don't know enough about the political sphere there to be able to comment. In Virginia, I don't know that we have like officially filed candidates yet, but the likely Democratic nominee is Abigail Spanberger, who's been a very strong supporter of transit. She's sort of down 95, a little past Fredericksburg. So she's sort of like part of the state that definitely gets Northern Virginia, but also kind of gets Central Virginia. The likeliest, probably candidate on the Republican side is the Lieutenant Governor, Winsome Sears, who honestly, I don't know what her positions are. I could speculate, but I'm not going to. I think that what is probably going to be most likely to come up in the Virginia elections is going to be whatever happens in Congress this time and whatever the new president is pushing, and this is going to be seen as a bit of a referendum on whatever that is going on. I do think transportation issues in gubernatorial elections are always important. They do always come up. They matter to people. I know that all of you in this room know when if you go to a party or whatever, and you say you work with the Action Committee for Transit, someone will talk to you about transportation. Like, it always happens. So transportation is always sort of an underlying key plank in the platform on both parties. But I don't know how much of a role it's really going to play. That goes back to, Bill, what you were saying. We're in an unprecedented time.
Just because you're a member of the board of Metro, you qualify for free entrance to ACTA meetings. ACTA, until about 3 years ago, for a period of about 10 years, sponsored nationally local transit advocates.
Yes.
They've done away with that.
No, they still have it. I'm sorry, please continue.
Well,
I don't think they have.
If they still have it, I would hope that the upcoming legislative conference, which all of us can file these, by the way, is influence in Washington, would again have a session on promoting support for transit in communities across the nation, including a lot of rural and small communities that are served by small agencies and with support from the various areas on agencies on aging as well. But if they still have it, I'm wrong. I thought they had done away.
Well, I believe they still have a program by which any organization that's a member of their grassroots group called NAPTA, which there's no fee, you just have to sign up, can apply for micro grants in the $5,000 to $10,000 range. They did run it last year or 2 years ago. Maybe they're not doing it. I'll double check.
I had thought they that. I'm pleased to hear that maybe they're not.
I will double check. And I'll share back the information. But working with the transit industry is also going to be critical, because the first call from a member of Congress is usually to their transit agency. What do you need to keep service running? So it's really important to be involved and understand what the industry itself is advocating for.
So thank you guys for being such a lively audience this evening. Please give a good warm applause to Sarah. Sarah, thank you for speaking to us tonight, and we'll look to you and hopefully to help us keep pushing the good fight as they come along this season. So with that, thank you guys for coming to the first meeting of 2025. But I'm being handed announcements. February 11th, same bat time, same bat station. I'm not too old that I don't get that reference.